Welcome back to video number 4 in the series Understanding Adolescents by Walking in Their Shoes. As a reminder, the goal of the series is to help us make the shift to thinking developmentally. So just a quick recap of the main points we explored in videos number 1 through 3. First was that idea of development as a life backpack that we give to children when they're born and fill with all the things we feel they need to thrive. We realize that in adolescence, young people take off and take charge of their backpack. They explore what's inside, try things out, decide what's important to them, and in the end, repack their backpack with all the things they want in the order that makes sense to them. So development in adolescence is really this time of exploring, figuring things out, and taking charge of their life. Reorganizing their backpack is the young person's way of adapting to the changes of adolescence. And this repacking is done in stages. So if you remember that those early adolescent stages is the time in which everything is new. All these changes start, and these young people in late elementary and middle school years start dealing with these changes with little life experience to make sense of it all. Then as youth start to figure these changes out, they move into middle adolescence, those high school years, which is the time for testing and refining, getting deeper into all these changes. This testing is purposeful. It's the developmental changes of adolescence prime them to take risks and try things out. Finally, as young people move into late adolescence and early adulthood, those post-high school years, they experience a time of feeling in between. All the things they count on changes, and there's no certificate of completion that lets them know when they've graduated to being an adult. And finally, adolescents are active in taking charge of their development by accomplishing developmental tasks. Things like dealing with a new body, brain, and sexuality, learning to think a new way, figuring out their identity, values, and role, and learning to relate differently to peers and parents and caregivers. Throughout this, we explored what young people needed to support, through all this, young people need support to help them grow and thrive in healthy ways. We brainstormed many of these needs. So I've taken them and framed them into what research tells us about what young people need. So the first category of needs is all about supports. Young people need supportive relationships with teen-friendly sticky adults, those who stick with them through the thick and thin, and provide them with a web of support. They also need supportive relationships with parents and caregivers, and with a network of peers that help them belong and feel accepted. They also need the support of an environment that guides and nurtures them and doesn't do them harm. So those environments are places where we've addressed the toxic social conditions that interfere with young people's ability to thrive. Things like discrimination, racism, poverty, trauma, chronic stress. And these are environments in which young people are surrounded with people, places, and events that reflect them and help them learn and gives them pride. Youth also need opportunities to practice and refine skills, things like thinking in a new way and taking another person's perspectives, all those executive functioning skills. The opportunities to experiment and take risks safely, and to learn in ways that are fun and relevant, and to be creative, and finally, engaged as leaders to make a difference. Young people also need to belong and be connected to places like schools, where they're known, where they fit, where they're expected and supported to succeed, and people notice and care if they aren't there. And connected to communities that welcome them and engage them to contribute and make a difference. So do these all ideas make sense, but are they worth the effort? Do they truly make a difference? Well, research says yes, they do. Young people with these supports do better in all the ways we know make a difference. So it's worth our time and effort to ensure that all young people have these foundational needs met. And when that's the case, we surround and immerse youth with all the things they need to build their competence, their confidence, that sense of mastery and self-efficacy, their connections, those memberships, belonging, safety, and structure. We help them build the character, things like sense of autonomy, responsibility, and self-awareness. We help them with caring and compassion, that sense of being cared for, the ability to form strong relationships, and the desire to care for others. And finally, we help them build their contribution to self, family, community, and society. So these are the 6 C's of positive youth development. And they're the basic ingredients of what young people need to develop and thrive in healthy ways. So positive youth development, if you're not familiar with it, is a framework that wraps all of these ideas together to guide our work. It's an approach or philosophy that guides people, organizations, and communities in the way that they organize services, supports, and opportunities so that all young people can develop to their full potential. The positive youth development framework focuses on strengths and positive outcomes. Young people are recognized to be resourceful and resilient with strengths and resources that they need to thrive. While problems are addressed, they're done by helping youth build on their own strengths. It shifts the focus from seeing youth as problems to fix, instead as strong and resilient, capable of meeting their own needs with support and guidance. A strengths focus is important because there are gaps and opportunities across many groups of young people. For example, young people of color, immigrant youth, youth with disabilities, just to name a few. These gaps really hinder their chances to flourish. So doing something about these discrepancies in the structures in our country that maintain them is a critical role for us. But we also need to work with youth with this strengths-based perspective to build their capacities. So this positive youth development framework is grounded on the premise that all youth have the strengths and the capacity to thrive. By examining young people of color, young people with disabilities, all those young people who really have gaps in the opportunities and supports that they need to thrive. When we do it from this youth development lens, we start to see a different story than we hear most often, and we can really help young people move farther and do more for them. So what does positive youth development mean for our work? Well, as I mentioned, it's a guide on how to apply development to everything that we do. It reminds us to always put youth at the center and think developmentally about their issues. It provides the supports young people need to grow and thrive, and it, again, as noticed before, focuses and builds on young people's strengths. This framework also provides a process for our work. So it means approaching issues with a developmental lens, really getting behind where young people are going and what's going on with all their changes, and thinking about how that affects them. It also helps us analyze the development and the context that contributes to health issues. So we really get in and do this analysis. And finally, it helps us figure out how to address youth needs as a foundational part of all the efforts we work on. So positive youth development is a process that we can use in things like needs assessment, planning strategies, programs, and policies that address health needs of youth, figuring out how to address social determinants of health, aligning the youth-focused efforts at state and local levels, and training people to effectively work with youth, families, and communities. So at this point, you may wonder, well, what does this actually look like? Great concept, but how do you practically do this? So let's take a look at this process used in assessing and refining family planning clinics. So imagine you manage the state family planning program. One important population in your program is adolescents. So you first start by assessing how your clinics typically function in your state, thinking with this developmental lens for what the experience is like for teens. So you find that most are managed as really traditional clinics with those waiting areas that are comfortable but bland, not really welcoming. In seeing that when young people check in, it's business as usual, you are just a number. There's not really welcoming, and you can see that they're in power because they stand behind the desk and control what happens. The exam room is sterile, foreign, and uncomfortable, and the goal of the visit is for staff to assess what's wrong and tell you what to do about it. It's all business. Young people could be anyone in the exam room, short to the point, on to the next exam room. So it's clear that young people just don't fit well in these clinics. Work clinics just don't fit young people very well. So you do a developmental analysis to help understand what young people need from family planning services. So you find things that make a difference, things like young people feeling out of control of these changes and having all these new feelings and interests without a whole lot of experience to guide them, with a lot of questions about, am I normal? And the need for real privacy. This is stuff that's kind of hard to think about, and it's all out of control to them. They're learning to think abstractly. So if you think about thinking end of development, the learning to think a new way, developmental tasks, you see that they're learning to think abstractly and take another person's perspective, things that are important as you look at relationships and sexuality. They're also developing those executive functioning skills, so they're not always consistent in making decisions, planning ahead, analyzing situations. And finally, with thinking, they easily get overwhelmed and overcomplicate situations. So what might be simple to us becomes very complicated to them. And sexuality isn't the simplest thing in the world. You also look at their identity development and see that they're really trying on and experimenting. That's part of their role. And figuring out their values. These are all important things that contribute to their sexual health and their behaviors. And finally, that you see that peers are very important. They really carry weight with a young person, and they become the gold standard for adolescents as they compare themselves to their peers. And finally, they're learning those relationship skills that are so critical when you're dealing with sexuality. At the same time, you also analyze the toxic social conditions that might interfere with young people's sexual health, so that you find in their communities where your family planning services are located, young people have many adverse childhood experiences, these ACEs indicators, things like family violence, abuse, and conflict in their history. You also find that many of these young people are coming from under-resourced communities where their income is low, there's limited job potential, there's limited transportation, there's few social supports, and a crumbling community infrastructure. So those social determinants that just really muck things up and make life complicated and hard. You also find that many of the young people are involved in systems in ways that aren't helpful to them in lots of ways, so that education, there isn't a good fit there, so there's high dropout rates. And through all that family violence, there's a high proportion of young people in the foster care system. And finally, you find that the dominant culture doesn't really well reflect the youth in a positive way, positive, supportive way, in things like their race and ethnicity, or their income status, or their immigrant status. So you now move into what do young people need developmentally from family planning services. And you see that they need services where things are comfortable and flexible, simple and easy, because it's all new and it's easy to get overwhelmed. And we teach them skills. We don't just say, here's a condom, go use it. We really break it down into small, incremental steps and help them start at ground one. And of course, they need us to start with their interests first, because there's so much going through their head. They're experiencing so much. If we don't start where they are first, they're not going to hear where we need them. And they need adequate time with us to unearth and answer those questions, to really assess what their needs are all about. Of course, privacy is prime to what they need from family planning services, that confidential care that they need before they'll actually walk through the door. They also need family planning service to involve their friends in some way, so that what you tell us can be reflected and brought back to their friends or processed with their friends, who will help them make sense of this all. And finally, clinics need to have the adults where young people can feel comfortable and talk easily, because these are hard, complicated situations to talk about when it's new and kind of exotic. If we look at their contextual needs, those creating an environment where they're supported to thrive, you will also see that they need the clinics to help them think through how to manage their real life experiences, those real life challenges, and also help figuring out their identity in a world where there isn't a good fit between themselves and the culture of their society that they live in. And finally, they need the supports to engage with those social supports that help them deal with these big picture challenges like violence or conflict or instability. So you wrap all this information and shift how you work with family planning clinics so that they shift how they work with young people. So you help them become places that are full of caring, sticky adults, those staff who ask lots of questions and listen to young people's answers, helping them puzzle things through. And as mentioned before, really starting where the young people are and then getting to the clinic's goals second. The staff also get to know youth. Relationships really are primary and matter, and the staff reflect the young people. These clinics also become places that are welcoming, and it's designed to be comfortable, not sterile, more vibrant. The staff say, "Hi, glad you're here," when the young people enter, and they use young people's names frequently so that they are known. They may provide opportunities for youth to have fun and interact with their friends as they come in and sit in the clinic. Friends are welcome. So things like graffiti walls or questions of the day that they can Snapchat or text answers to. The clinic also guards confidentiality, that privacy that young people need in the clinic, in follow-up, through billing and in medical records, so that young people feel comfortable being there, willing to walk through the door. The clinic staff also take on the real-life situations and stressors that play an important role and get in the way of sexual health. So they ask about what's going on in a young person's life beyond the medical stuff. Things like what school is like, what's working there and what's not, their connections with parents and caregivers and peers to assess the strength or the health of those relationships, and the stressors and things that bring instability. They help young people connect with the supports that are available to them in their community, either by being familiar with and providing a warm handoff that helps young people actually access those supports, or if possible, putting their clinic and those services in or near each other. And finally, these youth-centered clinics engage young people as teachers to other youth on family planning issues by becoming peer educators, or working with youth to train the clinicians and staff on how to effectively counsel them. And finally, clinics partner together with youth to figure out how to do family planning and update how they do things in a youth-centered way. This process of changing family planning is taking the same kind of clinic, the same service, but just doing it differently. So this process of approaching youth and their health issues through a development is a shift if you're not used to thinking and working this way. But like anything, the more you do it, the more routine it becomes until it's just how you do work. If this is how you already think and work, please help others to do it too. The more we all can align our efforts from this positive youth development, strengths-focused approach, the more we're going to help young people thrive. So I'd like to leave you with the words of Gisela Kanapka, who was an early voice in the field of positive youth development. As a longtime faculty member in the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota, and the namesake for the Kanapka Institute for Best Practices in Adolescent Health, the center under which the State Adolescent Health Resource Center is a part of, Gisela was a pioneer in the social group work method where she'd engage young people by listening to them, hearing their stories, their dreams, and their aspirations. So what she said, I think that really resonates with me, is that it means to help develop with these young people and encourage them with the strength to slay the dragon of despair, to scale the hard walls, and to feel the warm glow of love. Human services need people, not procedures. So if I have done something in my life, and if I still can do it, I'd like to leave as a legacy people who can work with the young with strength, knowledge, imagination, and deep caring. So that's what I ask of you to continue to be doing, is to do that caring, work with strength and knowledge and imagination on a daily basis. Thanks for spending your time with me on these videos. As always, let me know what you think about young people their health and development. I'd love to hear your ideas.